Hello everyone, and welcome to Order, the place where we answer questions that nobody asked. ULTRAKILL is a game with a lot of variety in its weapons, with each of them having drastically different use cases from each other, while simultaneously being able to use them for combos and doing whatever the fuck this is. But there's one weapon, or rather a set of weapons, that have always stood out. The Railcannons. The Railcannons do a lot of damage on a long cooldown, which makes them feel more like an ability rather than a weapon. Which got me thinking, what if we decided to get rid of every weapon in our arsenal and try to beat ULTRAKILL with only the Railcannon? But first, let's set some ground rules. The only weapons that I'm allowed to use are the free Railcannon variants. So the electric, the screwdriver, and the malrail. The only exceptions to this rule are the feedbacker and the whiplash. The feedbacker exclusively for picking up things like skulls, and the whiplash just for yellow hook points. I need to get an S rank in kills for every level. I'm adding this rule so that this doesn't become a repeat of my first ULTRAKILL video. And besides, there's no fun if I just skip past every enemy. I am not allowed to use cheats or major assists. I don't really think I need to explain this one. And finally, the run will be played on the new hardest difficulty, Brutal. You can blame my poor decision making on this one. So, with that out of the way, let's get into the video. Also, quick editor's note here, I started recording footage for this video back in May, so sorry this took so long. Let me start out Prelude by saying this. If I could describe Railcannon only in a single word, it would be repetitive. But to understand why, I'm going to quickly explain what makes the Railcannons good to begin with. The Railcannons by themselves are pretty underwhelming, which is where their synergies with other weapons comes into play. Finding the Railcannons with things like coins allows them to do so much more than they would normally. But when you take your other weapons away, you're left with two options. You either run, or you hide. Neither of which are very fun. My point with this entire tangent is that Railcannon only fucking sucks. 90% of this footage is just me waiting for my Railcannon to recharge. And mind you, I had hours of footage. I'm only showing you the interesting parts because God forbid this video be... Getting back on track, this room was the first that was actually kind of difficult. Rays by themselves aren't that difficult to deal with. But put a bunch of them in an enclosed space, and they quickly become a huge threat. My solution for this was to just target the strays, and then clean up any remaining filth. The rest of 0-1 was pretty easy, which is to be expected at the first level, but it still surprised me. Oh, wait a second, how could I forget the funny rock? Yeah, so I make it out to seem like a big deal, but in all honesty, the Maurice fight wasn't that bad. I did die once, but due to the sheer power of the screwdriver, I was able to beat the level. By this point, I had an idea of what role each variant was going to fulfill. The electric's infinite pierce made it good for enemies in the straight line, the malrail's explosion made it good for crowds, and the screwdriver's high damage and healing made it the ideal weapon for boss fights. And while we're on the topic of damage, let's talk about the environment. With no way of killing enemies while the Railcannon was on cooldown, I started to use the environment to kill them instead. While later levels tend to lack environmental kills, Prelude has them in spades, and their abundance makes it much easier to take advantage of. As for the level itself, yeah, not a whole lot happened. I mean, I guess this room was a bit challenging, but like, just dodge the enemies, it's not that hard. The only interesting thing that happened in 0-3 was the swords machine fight, and by interesting, I mean I ran around shooting him with a screwdriver for like 5 minutes. Look, when the bar is this low, I'll take anything. But, you know, maybe 0-4 will give us something interesting to talk about. I literally just stood up here. And there. And also there. And that was it. I'm gonna be honest with you. 0-5 was my breaking point. Cerberus is usually a pushover, but here he was by far the hardest part of Prelude. Or should I say... they were the hardest part. Because why fight one annoying enemy when you can fight two of them? And while I'm getting my ass kicked, I'm gonna explain another game mechanic. You see that gray bar next to my health? That is called hard damage. The only things you really need to know about hard damage is that you get it by being hit, it reduces your max HP, and playing stylishly makes it go away faster. This means that the game punishes you for being hit, which is actually a pretty good way of forcing the player to be more active in combat. when playing normally. I spent over 40 minutes across 2 recordings just fighting Cerberus, and I didn't even beat him. I admit it. I lost. No matter how many times I shot him, no matter how many times I died, no matter how many times I sat in this stupid corner, as long as one of them hit me every attack, then I couldn't win. I could have ended the challenge here. I already failed, so there's no real point in continuing. But I knew deep down that I couldn't live with myself if I backed out now. So, I changed the challenge from beating the entire game to just beating as many levels as possible. I auto-clicked away my frustrations and moved on to Limbo. Limbo introduces us to drones, and dear God, I hate these things. Drones are just like mosquitoes. They fly around, are constantly in your personal space, and are incredibly annoying. These first few rooms throw a lot of them at you, but once you get the blue skull, you don't really have to worry about them. It was at this point in the challenge where I really started to make use of the 3 R's. Rail, run away, and repeat. I don't have a script for this video, so I just came up with that on the spot. But I feel like that does encapsulate the repetitiveness of Railcannon only. You do the same thing over and over again until eventually all you want to do is join the trees down in violence. The level itself was pretty easy, as 1-1 has a lot of these doors that you can just use to hide behind while waiting for your Railcannon. Oh, and I also saw this. Look, I honestly feel like it speaks for itself. 1-2 was much of the same. Combine the sheer amount of hiding spots with the shortness of the level, and yeah, it isn't very interesting. You wanna know what is interesting? Street cleaners. The thing about street cleaners is that they have a damage resistance to explosions, meaning that I can't one-shot them with the Malrail. The only way for me to effectively deal with a group of street cleaners is to use the electric and line up a collateral. That sounds difficult, but street cleaners will constantly run at you in a straight line, which makes lining up collaterals pretty easy. The final room was a bit challenging. Putting projectile spam into a small room doesn't make for a good result, but after a few minutes of attempts, I was able to beat the level. Also, I'm not sure if Limbo just doesn't have proper pathfinding, but that weird glitch happened again. I honestly have no explanation for this. Okay, hold on, what's the level after this? Oh, dear God. I'm gonna start out 1 free by saying that I had an hour of footage in Limbo, and 1 free took up half of that. The reason why is because due to rule number 2, I'm forced to go through both skull paths, rather than just one. I decided to go with the blue path first, because the blue path is almost always the easier of the two. My assumptions were correct, as the blue path was surprisingly easy. There is a fair amount of projectile spam, but other than that, it's not that bad. The only real highlight was me constantly missing my shots while corner peeking this Maurice. While the red path wasn't difficult, it was absolutely fucking absurd. After I got through most of the projectile spam in the first room, the enemies just kinda stopped. They all had a line of sight on me, so they should have been attacking, but for some reason they didn't. And then, while at 6 health, I managed to expertly evade these drones for a minute straight. I then had to dodge the Cerberus for an additional 15 seconds before slowly railing him to death. After the door didn't open, I found out that there were still 2 more schisms alive, but only one of them was attacking me? What? Oh, but if you thought it stopped there, heavens no, because enemies started attacking me in slow motion. What the fuck? And it's not like this was just a one-life thing either. This was consistently happening every life. As far as I know, I'm the first person to document something like this. Which is cool, but at the same time, why here? What specifically about this area makes enemies act like this? If you ask me, I think it was just a sign from God telling me to stop doing this challenge. Unfortunately for him, he didn't account for one thing. I'm an atheist. So I finished off the red path by just hoarding all of the enemies into this corner. I gave the hideous mass a bath because I did not feel like staying here any longer, and moved on to 1-4. After the absolute hell I went through with Cerberus, I expected V2 to be very difficult, but he actually wasn't that bad. There was, however, one glaring issue. V2's speed and erratic movement made it so that I didn't have a method of consistently hitting him. But what if I did? While the rules state that I can't use major assists, I am allowed to use minor assists, including but not limited to auto-aim. Now that I had an aim button in my back pocket, all I needed now was a strategy. My original plan was to just stay away from V2 for as long as possible, only getting in close when I needed to hit him. However, that led to another problem: the rage meter. See, because V2 feels entitled due to being the first actual boss of the game, he'll get impatient with you if you keep running away from him, at which point he'll get enraged and promptly kill you. This means that if I wanted to kill him, I needed to strike a balance between running away, so I wouldn't take damage, and being close to him so he wouldn't get enraged. If V2 ever did get enraged, then I just needed to stay close to him until he was happy again. The only thing I had to worry about now was him killing me while my Railcannon was on cooldown. But due to the extra healing range provided by the screwdriver, I was able to kill V2 and move on to Lust. 2-1 was a very simple level. I saw these street cleaners just kind of standing there, took a stroll up the tower, and admired this bloodstain for a bit, but other than that, not a whole lot happened. 2-2 introduces us to yet another problem enemy: soldiers. So, remember what I said earlier about street cleaners having an explosion resistance? Okay, now turn that resistance into a full immunity and give it to an enemy that rolls around constantly, making it almost impossible to hit them. You see what I'm getting at here? If 90% of the challenge was me just standing still, then the other 10% was me trying not to fucking die. On another note, 2-2 is one of the few levels where you don't actually need to kill any enemies to progress. This meant that I would often have to check and make sure I'd killed every enemy so I wouldn't have to backtrack. In some cases, it was even harder to find the enemies than it was to kill them. However, this thoroughness also ended up leading to moments like this. Let's just say this didn't make me feel any better about soldiers. On the next attempt, I was revitalized and ready to stand in a corner for 5 minutes. Yeah, real exciting, I know. I then repeated this process for all of the other rooms for like 15 more minutes until I eventually beat the level. New Free gives me an excuse to talk about another game mechanic. Patch 15 made it so that electric weapons now conduct electricity through water, which means that I have the ability to do this. Oh yeah. It's all coming together. New Free also introduces us to Mind Flayers, everyone's favorite enemy for all the wrong reasons. Mind Flayers were an absolute nuisance during this challenge, as their high health, burst damage, and ability to teleport made it so that I practically had to target them if I wanted to have a chance at surviving. The screwdriver made this job much easier, as it removes their ability to teleport, which makes them a much less bigger threat. Through some trial and error and a bit of corner camping, I was able to rail that Mind Flayer and beat the level. 2-4 is a pretty interesting level. The fight with the hand was pretty boring, but the main fight was a completely different story. I'm used to beating this boss extremely fast, but I had severely underestimated just how much health he actually had. Let's do a little math. The screwdriver deals 10.25 damage every shot, which will round down to 10 for simplicity's sake. The corpse of Minos has 160 health. 160 divided by 10 means I have to shoot him 16 times, and with the Railcannon's cooldown of 16 seconds, that means I'd have to survive for over 4 minutes straight. No matter what I did, I'd only be able to get through a small percentage of his health. Which is kinda like how only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. Ultimately, I gave up and decided to take the L on this one, which moves us over to Gluttony. 3-1 was another wacky level, but this time all of the goofiness was on my end. On my first attempt, I tried to use the secret room in order to isolate the Mind Flayer so I could kill it easier. which did work, but I got lost on the way out and promptly died to the acid. On my next attempt, I was able to easily make it past the first room, with the second and third rooms following suit. But the fourth room was different. On my first attempt, I made it past the first set of enemies, but died to the second. On the next attempt, I made it past the first set of enemies, but died to the second. Starting to notice a pattern here. So, as an intellectual, I decided that my best course of action would be to go back to the beginning and grab a piercer. My reasoning for this was I had already beat the first set of enemies, so I could use the piercer to help deal with that set faster and grind out attempts at the second set. Yeah, the default piercer wasn't the most ideal weapon, but it would get the job done, which was all I really cared about. After I made it past this room, I quickly realized something. There's not a checkpoint right here. The next checkpoint is up there, past the massive wall of projectiles the game decides to throw at you. You know, wouldn't it be funny if I got sniped from across the map just moments before a checkpoint? Okay, I guess that's not too big of a setback. I can just clear out this room again. Alright, that's it. Time to go back to the start, grab literally everything, go back here, and die anyways. After I killed everyone here, I went back to the stairway, killed everyone with the Railcannon, and finally made it to the last room. I went back to the start for the last time, unequipped everything, and made my way into the final room. The only issue I had here was with the Mind Flayer, but once I got rid of it, I was able to easily beat the level. With 3-1 completed, all I needed to do now was rail Gabriel. Wait, that's not what I meant. Gabriel was a lot easier than I expected, and I feel like that's mainly due to one main thing. Even on brutal difficulty, his attacks are very simplistic and easy to dodge. All I really needed to do was just memorize his attack patterns so I could live long enough to actually kill him. And by using the screwdriver to soak up whatever damage I did take, in a matter of about 15 minutes and only 5 deaths, I beat Gabriel. And yeah, I know that says only 8 minutes and 2 deaths, but I had a 7-minute attempt that I restarted for some reason. If you're asking why I did that, good question. Greed marks a turning point in the challenge. Throughout all of Prelude and Act 1, I had been recording entire layers in one setting. But starting in Greed, I started to record individual levels in one sitting. The difficulty curve between acts is steep, and considering my current success rate, I wasn't feeling too good about my odds. However, 4-1 was mostly the same as what we've been experiencing. The sheer openness of the map meant that there were plenty of spots where I could snipe enemies like I was Lee Harvey Oswald. I think I lost my mind trying to echolocate where a street cleaner was, only to find out that it was stuck behind this wall. You know, to be entirely honest, this didn't even faze me that much because I've somehow seen weirder. 4-1 also introduces us to virtues, which can be a major threat if left alive, but they can also be one-shot by the Railcannon, so they're not that bad. In some cases, it was actually beneficial to not kill them, due to one main mechanic: friendly fire. While Virtue Friendly Fire is mostly limited to fodder enemies, that still meant that I could focus my attention on the higher health enemies, while the Virtues cleaned up the rest. I beat the level without that many issues, which means we can move on to 4-2. The beginning of 4-2 was pretty uneventful, but around the second half is when things started to get off the rails. It started out simple enough, just me using slam storage to kill enemies from above, but the skull paths? Look, I think it's just better if I show you. There is one major issue with 4-3. Factoring in the times that I died here, this first area took me about 5 minutes. Literally everything after this area also took about 5 minutes. The final area took 15. I don't have anything else to add here, so I'm just gonna... Well, I've used 2 montages within the last minute, so I should probably get back to actually doing my job. 4-4 is the rematch with V2. and this fight was actually pretty similar to the first. V2 does have a few new tricks up his sleeve, but the general strategy remains the same. So after about 10 minutes of attempts, I made it past his first phase. Oh, right, I almost forgot. Yeah, V2's second phase is so comically easy that I almost didn't even mention it. There is still one problem. How do I get across this gap without whiplash? The obvious answer was to just do some simple parkour, which worked up until here when I realized that the third pillar was too far away for me to jump to. So I did a speedrunning trick called a dive, which in layman's terms is pretty much just a way to gain a lot of vertical and horizontal mobility. It actually gave me too much mobility, as I sailed directly over the pillar and landed on the platform where the enemies spawn. At least, where they should spawn. Okay, maybe I just missed the enemy trigger. If I head over to this pillar, then I should hit the trigger for the enemies to spawn. Oh, nope, that didn't work. Alright, hear me out. What if I reload my checkpoint, do a dive that only gets me to the second pillar, realize that I'm an idiot because I could have easily made that jump to the third pillar, and then go back to the platform? God damn it, surely spawning the enemies isn't something as stupid as just using whiplash. What the fuck? Yeah, so apparently the enemies don't spawn here until you use whiplash. I was always under the assumption that there was just a certain threshold where they spawned, but apparently not. You know, it's just now dawned on me that this is already my longest video, and I still have 3 more layers to go. Why am I still doing this? Live 1 managed to single-handedly make me go through the 5 stages of grief, but it didn't start out like that. I did a little parkour, did this, and went through each of the rooms to test out which one was the easiest. Of the 3, the right room was by far the easiest, due to only having 3 enemies. For reference, the left and middle rooms have 12 and 16 enemies respectively. Well then, that settles it. I go to the right room, kill all of the enemies, and why can't I pick up the skull? So, at the beginning of the level, when I unequipped the whiplash, I forgot to equip the feedbacker. In an entire level, nay, an entire layer, filled to the brim with skulls, you're telling me I forgot to equip the one weapon I had in my arsenal that actually allowed me to pick them up? Yes, and if you couldn't tell by my incoherent rambling, this was where my descent into madness truly began. Now, I would love to tell you that attempt 2 went by much more smoothly than attempt 1, but have you seen the runtime of this video? I went back into the right room with high hopes, only for them to be shot down mercilessly. One too many deaths in this room put me at an all-time low, and in turn, I did something drastic. I was allowing ground slams. Now, in all fairness, I didn't have any strict rules on ground slams prior to this. It's not like I can unequip my feet, but I had only ever used them as a last resort. But here, they were my only option. The left room actually went a lot better than I expected, mainly due to the power of conducting electricity and the newly added ground slam. It still took me a few minutes, but you know, at this point I'll take anything. And then there's the middle room. Now, going off of how long it took me to complete the other rooms, I assumed that this room would take about 5 minutes. Surely it wouldn't take more than twice that amount, right? Yep, it took me 12 minutes to beat this room. And just to prevent this segment from being any longer than it needs to be, I'll keep this brief. The main issues here were the 2 Maurices, the Virtue, and especially the Mind Flayer. Each of these enemies by themselves can do a lot of damage, so when you put all of them into a room that is somehow both small and open, death is pretty much a guarantee. There were a few funny moments to help spice up the monotony, but other than that, there's not much else I can say about this room. The last thing I want to mention here is sentries. Normally sentries aren't that hard to deal with, but here our options are severely limited. Ground slams are inconsistent and require you to get up close, and the Railcannon's on a 16-second timer. Not to mention that sentries shoot twice, meaning that I'd often get 2-tapped while trying to kill them. Fortunately, after about 8 minutes of banging my head against the wall, I was able to clear the room and move on. Part 2 was, like everything else, pretty uneventful. Other than striking down this Maurice with the power of God, the only noteworthy things here were the shack and the ferryman. Attempts 1, 2, and 3 died to a Cerberus, attempt 4 died to my hubris, and attempt 5, while slower than every other attempt, was the one that ultimately succeeded. The ferryman is a relatively difficult boss fight, so I was racking my brain figuring out how I would kill him. Luckily for me, I didn't have to. It's a shame that I didn't record my microphone for any of these clips, since I was laughing for like 15 seconds straight after this happened. I went into the ship and was promptly faced with a reality check. Don't get me wrong, I like 5-3, it's one of my favorite levels in the game, but the fact is, this is quite possibly the worst situation for Railcannon only. Small spaces, tight corridors, and high health enemies all serve to hinder the Railcannon's performance. After that failed attempt, I went to the red room, died a bit, reflected on what I'd gotten myself into, and died some more. So many times to the point where I decided to cut my losses and go back to the room where I started. After about 10 minutes of repeated back and forth between the rooms, I was finally able to get both of the skulls and move on. Fortunately, the next few rooms decided to be kind. Unfortunately, the dual-wield room didn't care. Even after 45 minutes of gameplay, I still wasn't able to beat this room. That being said, I did have one trick up my sleeve. I have the uncanny ability to take a video that should have been fully edited in a month and drag it out over a 2-year span. This means that I was able to replay through all of the levels that I'd previously failed. Fortunately for me, attempt 3 on the Ship of Fools was much smoother than the first two. It only took me about 9 minutes to make it back to the dual-wield room, which was impressive considering that my first attempt took me more than twice that. Surprisingly, the rest of the dual-wield room was pretty uneventful, though I do have to give a shout out to whoever put these side rooms here. I grabbed the rocket launcher, which I immediately put away, and made my way through the rest of the level, which after the hell I've just experienced seemed like a cakewalk in comparison. Looking back on it now, this was one of the few times where I actually had fun fighting the Leviathan. Don't get me wrong, I don't think the Leviathan is a bad boss, just an incredibly easy one once you know what you're doing. However, Railcannon only turned this otherwise stagnant fight into a surprisingly fun 20-minute challenge. The main thing I want to highlight here are the attack phases, of which there are 2. The first set is nothing special, just some projectile spam and a headbutt, but the second set is where things get trickier. See, unlike the head attacks, which are relatively easy to dodge, the tail swings required you to focus on them, a task that was made much harder when he started doing both at the same time. Thankfully, I had a system to combat this, and it's just as dumb as you think it is. By mentally referring to the tail swipes as either an upper or a lower, I was able to divert my attention away from them and just focus on dealing damage. There was one tiny problem with this strategy, and by tiny, I mean really fucking stupid. My original idea was to have the names be relative to the tail's position. Simple enough, right? Apparently not, because soon after, I started calling them relative to my position instead of the tail. I've done quite a few dumb things on this channel. I've broken this game apart purely to avoid kills. I've beaten this game without movement keys. Hell, I've even played Roblox. But I don't think anything will top me forgetting my own strategy not even 5 minutes after I created it. Thankfully, the rest of the level wasn't that bad. Yeah, it took a while, but the attempts were a lot more lengthy than they were difficult. I would also like to point out that not all of those restarts were deaths. There were a couple occasions where I just decided to restart after missing the first shot. Heresy reminded me of a concept that's been consistent throughout this entire video. Railcannon only is not a test of skill, it's a test of patience. That's not to say that there aren't skillful moments. Hell, we just talked about one, but the truth is, those moments are few and far between. Like this room here isn't difficult, it should only take about 30 seconds, tops. But because of the nature of this challenge, it took me 5 minutes. I've gone on a lot of rants in this video, but if there's one thing you should take away, it's that there are 2 types of challenges. There are challenges that are actually fun to play, and there are challenges that are just wastes of time. I'll let you guess which one this falls into. The rest of 6-1 actually wasn't that bad. There were multiple spots where I could safely wait for a recharge, and the boring yet effective strategy of corner peeking was on full display. I even managed to hit a few clips in between the absurd amount of waiting I had. The hideous masses in the final room were annoying to deal with, but ultimately they weren't that bad. After about 6 minutes of trial and error, I was able to beat the final room and move on to the Gabriel rematch. There are two things I want to say about the Gabriel fight. Well, technically 3, but we'll get to that third one a bit later. After a couple minutes of attempts, I decided to see if anyone else had done this challenge to try and get some advice. The only thing I found was a video from a few years ago detailing someone else's challenge run, and it is quite possibly the most unhelpful video I have ever watched. Now, I mean no disrespect to the creator. I'm sure they put a lot of effort into this video, but they just did not say anything? Let me show you what I mean.
The basis of this fight is to dodge his attacks and rail him with the screwdriver.
That's it. Not even 10 full seconds of gameplay were dedicated to the Gabriel refight. Again, I mean no ill will to this guy, I just thought it was funny. Hi, editing order here. I'm just putting this in because it turns out Space Seal is a girl, so my bad. Now that I knew that I was truly alone on this, I did the only thing I could. Ram my head into a wall for 40 minutes straight. What made this even worse is that of the levels I'd failed up to this point, this one felt the most doable. Strengthened by an early run, which lasted 4 minutes by the way, died just one shot away from victory. I tried for as long as I could afterwards, but ultimately I gave up. However, that layer of confidence meant that this was actually the first level I retried, and on the run back, I beat him first try. Wait, what? Okay, so I may have accidentally selected a lower difficulty, but if this proved anything, it's that this is possible. Possible didn't mean easy though, as it still took another 30 minutes of attempts before I finally beat Gabriel. And for the sake of transparency, I did use cheats, but that was only to skip past the first phase once I was well aware that I could beat. And while we're on the topic of retries, I should talk about the 2 levels I skipped over previously. Hi, it's currently January 31st. I have been doing this shit for way too long, and I have just now realized that I don't have the Cerberus footage. So I have to do all of it again. As it turns out, anger is a very powerful motivator. I'm just glad I didn't have to spend 40 minutes recollecting footage. As for Minos, it was about the same as it was last time. Even after 2 separate refights, I still wasn't able to kill Minos. I'm positive that it can be done, but unfortunately I don't have the patience to do it myself, so this remains as my only loss. And then violence happened. Violence has always been the most Violence has always been the most difficult part of these challenge runs. I'm not gonna act like it isn't, but Railcannon only was different. And I don't mean different in the sense that it was easy, I mean different in the sense that I couldn't beat a single level without breaking the rules. So here's how we're gonna do this. I'm gonna go through my original recording, up until the point where I fail. I'll then pick back up with a successful attempt and finish the level from there. Got it? Alright. Mannequins are an interesting enemy. On one hand, their erratic movements and wall climbing makes them tough targets to hit, and their projectiles can wipe you out in seconds if you're not careful. But on the other hand, you can do that too. With this knowledge in mind, I cleared the first, second, and even third rooms with relative ease. The fourth room was where things went south, though in hindsight they really shouldn't have. I'm ashamed to admit that this was where I failed, because other than the small size of the room itself, there is nothing in here that should warrant quitting after 6 minutes of attempts. Attempt 2 was much kinder to me, And after struggling with this Mind Flayer for a few minutes, I made my way down to the Minotaur. The Minotaur fight is fairly inoffensive, so the main thing I want to highlight here is the time disparity between attempts. I beat the Minotaur after about 6 minutes on my successful attempt. A pretty good showing if you ask me. My original attempt took 15 minutes, which again shouldn't have happened. The majority of these attacks are focused more on area denial rather than damage, meaning all you have to focus on is dodging and hitting your shots, which, to be fair, I wasn't doing much of either. Regardless of initial difficulty, Phase 2 is a cakewalk in comparison, allowing us to move on to 7-2. 7-2 was a much needed change of pace. Guttermen have a lot of health, especially for a common enemy, but their slow speed and large hitbox more than make up for it. Couple that with an abundance of cover and wide open space, and you have an enemy that can be dealt with from complete safety. Also, even if I didn't know it at the time, both the blue and green rail cannons are capable of piercing Gutterman's shields. And upon further testing, coins, shotgun pellets, magnets, nails, the chainsaw, the jumpstart cable, even the feedbacker are all capable of doing the same. Unfortunately, my trivia knowledge couldn't get me past the train station for two main reasons. The first is the setting. This is a small room without any safe spots or cover to hide behind, which I'll let you guess how that turned out. The second issue is this fucking stalker. Ironically, I haven't really worried about stalkers since I haven't had a reason to. But this one stalker in particular took away like 2 minutes. Actually, it wasn't that bad in retrospect, but that's not my point here. My point is that I might as well be soft-locked here. I can't leave him alone, I can't shoot him, I can't even Goomba stomp him because all of that results in a Gutterman that I can't heal off of. If I want to move forward, then I need to kill the Stalker without sanding the Gutterman. And on the repeat, that's exactly what happened, which thankfully opened up the rest of the level. The rest of 7-2 was smooth sailing. Gutterman AI is fairly easy to exploit for free stomps, and gutter tanks, which I've had issue with in the past, can be dealt with in much the same way. All that's left now is the train station, which can be dealt with by not being in the train station, and the archive, which, while cramped, does have a lot of cover to work with. Couple that with ground slams, which I'm only just now finding out the utility of, and after a couple minutes, I made my way to 7-3. 7-3 is a classic example of my own stupidity being the cause of my downfall rather than the level itself. On that note, there were two main instances that led to this. There's the blood tree, where I spent 3 minutes running around in circles without ground slamming once, and this pair of mannequins, which caused me to commit my biggest blunder of the run: parrying. It's as good a time of any to mention that I wasn't exactly in the best headspace when I recorded this. I mean, by this point, I am over a month into recording, which is already the longest time I've spent collecting footage. I am fresh off of 2 failed levels, and I guarantee you the only thing on my mind was getting this over with. Like always, I finished the level as best I could, but this is still very much deserving of a retry. And what a retry it was. I went into this expecting a challenge, or at the very least a little bit of adversity. That did not happen. Yeah, that's right. I beat the second to last level of the game at the time without dying once. And this wasn't even a long deathless run either. This took 8 minutes. 0-3 took longer than that. Now, I'm willing to admit that 7-3 is the easiest level of violence, but I'm also willing to admit that I don't care, because looking back on it, this is some of the cleanest ULTRAKILL I've ever played. Every part of this run was fueled by a man that had already spent over a year editing a video that was nowhere close to completion. But I wasn't just gonna give up there. So, with the copious amounts of determination flowing through my veins, I breezed my way through 7-3 to move on to the final level. And yes, I'm well aware that 7-4 is not the last level of ULTRAKILL, but I don't have any footage of fraud, and at this point in editing, I really can't be bothered. That being said, 7-4 was not going to be an easy finish. Yet, ironically, the first half failed to give me any trouble, allowing me to sit back and watch some fireworks and reminisce on the good old days. The security system was my first real obstacle, and a pretty fun one at that. Without being able to speedrun my way through this fight, I had to get creative. And after a bit of testing, I found that I could use the defense system's own explosives against it. All it took after that was some targeting adjustments and a few minutes of attempts in order to beat the defense system and move on to the final boss. Now, I've done a lot of complaining during this video, so please just bear with me and allow me one final rant. The Earth Mover Brain fucking sucks. I'm not even gonna censor that because that's the truth. They somehow made a boss that is neither challenging nor fun to fight. That's impressive. And I'm not even saying that out of spite or because I'm bad at the game. This is an objectively bad boss. Every enemy, and I do mean every enemy, has something that makes them unique. Something that makes them fun to fight. Like B2, for instance. He has a multitude of weapons and attack patterns that ensure every encounter plays out differently. The Earth Mover has a fucking ball. The final boss of layers 7 out of 9 is a glorified mannequin. Oh, but the level itself is the boss. I get that. It's a great set piece, don't get me wrong, but that doesn't excuse the fact that I'm playing Flappy Bird instead of ULTRAKILL. You wanna know the worst part? Is that even if I made it past all of that, I get greeted by a goddamn timer. Let's calm the music down and take a breather, because this hurt. All of my hopes of finishing this challenge out on a win ended due to something completely out of my control. Even if I could use all 80 seconds to escape, that only gives me 5 shots, which simply isn't enough. Unfortunately, we just don't have enough time to clear the entire room. I hate to say it, but we lost. Oh, and as for the retry, don't bother. And with that, we've officially reached the end of ULTRAKILL Railcannon only. So to answer the question, no, you can't beat ULTRAKILL with only the Railcannon, but you can get pretty close. Of the 29 levels I played through, there were only 2 that I couldn't beat, and even then, they were still close. As for the levels I didn't play through, the Prime Sanctums and Encores are likely impossible, and Fraud, well, I'll get to Fraud someday. With the formalities out of the way, let's address the elephant in the room. I started production for this video on May 7th, 2024. I'm currently recording this outro on July 8th of 2026, over 2 years later. It goes without saying, but it should not have taken this long, and for that, I'm sorry. If it's any reconciliation, I guarantee you the next video won't take 2 years to finish. With that being said, I can't help but feel like there's a silver lining to this. I started making videos as a self-loving freshman with nothing to lose. Since then, I've grown into both a person and a content creator that I can be proud of. If you stuck around this far, then consider hitting the subscribe button. It's free and it motivates me to keep making videos like these. But before I go, I just want to say, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.